Sergeant Jake Morrison stayed low next to the burning wreckage, his rifle ready and his eyes sharp. The alien ship crashed hard into the red sand of Xeria 4, leaving a long trench behind it. There were bodies of alien warriors all around the crash site. Their fancy armor was broken and useless. Jake knew what he had to do. The rules were easy to understand. If you see aliens, tell someone and keep going. Stay out of it. Don't get in touch. Do your job and go back to base. But then something made him stop. A noise. It hurts and is low, like an animal that is hurt and doesn't want to show weakness. It came from the inside of the broken ship. Jake got closer, and his boots made a crunching sound on the hot sand. A part of him screamed at him to just leave. This wasn't his issue. He had to do what he was told. But there was another part of him, the part that made him a soldier in the first place, that couldn't just let someone die. Even if that person was supposed to be his enemy. He climbed through the ship's hull, which was made of broken metal. His rifle light cut through the smoke and darkness inside. The air smelled like chemicals burning and something else he couldn't quite put his finger on. He thought it was alien. He knew everything about this was wrong, but he kept going. That's when he discovered her. A huge piece of metal that had fallen from the ceiling had her trapped. She looked dangerous even when she was lying there hurt and helpless. She had to be at least 8 feet tall, if not more. Even in the dim light, her skin looked like a deep violet color that shone. She had 4 arms, but 2 of them were hanging at strange angles, which meant they were broken or out of place. Her face was strange and beautiful, with sharp features and gold markings all over her skin that looked like tattoos. They ran down her face, across her neck and under her armor where they were hidden. Jake had seen these signs before in the intelligence reports at the base. They meant kings and queens. This wasn't just a random soldier from another planet. This person was important. A strong person. A queen or something like it. She opened her eyes and stared at him. Even though she was obviously in pain, they were bright and yellow. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Leave me, human," she said, and Jake almost jumped. Her English was perfect, even though her voice was deep and rough. How did she understand what he was saying? "I won't be caught. I will not be your prisoner." Jake quickly looked at the scanner on his wrist. The little screen showed red dots moving toward them. Patrols of the enemy. They were only about 15 minutes away, maybe less. His base was 30 miles to the northeast, right through some of the worst desert land on Earth. The 2 suns in the sky were already making the day too hot to bear, and it would only get worse. He turned around and looked at her. Looked at her for real this time. She was trying so hard to look strong so that no one would know how hurt she was. But he could see it. The way she breathed in short, shallow bursts. The way her body shook a little, probably from shock and blood loss. The way one of her legs was bent the wrong way under the metal pinning her down. She was going to die. Slowly maybe, but still dying. "Not leaving you," Jake said, and that was that. He put his rifle over his back and walked toward the metal beam. "And you're not being caught. You are being saved." Big difference. "You are a fool," she hissed, but her voice was less angry now. More confusion and maybe even a little bit of interest. Jake didn't say anything. He put his feet down and grabbed the beam with both hands. It was hot from the fire and heavier than it looked, but he had always been strong. He lifted with his legs and grunted with effort, raising it just enough for her to get free. She pulled her body out from under it, wincing with every move, and Jake let the beam fall back down. He knelt down next to her and looked at her injuries quickly. Definitely 2 broken arms. Ribs that might be broken. That leg looked bad. Burns on her side. She had lost a lot of blood, but it was a weird purple color that looked almost black in the dark. "Can you walk?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. She tried to get up, but she fell right away. Those yellow eyes showed pride first, then shame. She said, "No," in a low voice. Jake looked at his scanner again. The enemy was getting closer. It's been 10 minutes now. He didn't have time to think. He had to act. He got into position next to her and, before she could say anything, picked her up and put her over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. The same way he had carried hurt soldiers during training missions and the worst days of this war. She was big. Very heavy. He thought it might weigh 300 pounds or more. Her extra arms made it hard to balance the weight, and her height meant that her legs hung down past his waist. But he had carried heavier things during training exercises on Earth. He'd marched for miles with all of his gear and supplies. He could do this. He had to do this. "You will die out there, fool," she whispered in his ear as he walked toward the ship's exit. "The desert will kill you. The heat will kill you. My people will kill you. Let me go." Jake stepped outside into the bright sun and felt the temperature rise by about 20 degrees right away. The two suns of Ziria 4 hung in the sky like two angry eyes, already beating down on them without mercy. There was nothing but red sand, rocky hills, and heat waves that made the horizon shimmer and dance in front of him. 30 miles. He had to walk 30 miles through all of that, carrying someone who weighed as much as he did in full gear, while enemy soldiers chased them both. Jake said, probably, as he shifted her weight on his shoulders to get a better balance. He stepped into the sand for the first time and then again, getting into the groove. You might be right. This is going to kill me. But not today. I'm not going to die today, and neither are you. He began to walk northeast toward his base, safety, and the impossible. With each step, the sand crunched under his boots. He was already sweating. His legs hurt. His shoulders hurt. He kept going though. The broken ship behind them sent up a column of black smoke that looked like a signal fire. The enemy would see it. They would come to look. They would find the bodies in the place where the crash happened, and they would know that someone lived. They would hunt them. Jake was aware of all of this. He knew how dangerous it was. He knew what the odds were. He still walked. The queen on his shoulders didn't say anything else. She might have been saving her energy. She might have just been too shocked that a person, an enemy, was really trying to save her life. For some reason she didn't say anything while Jake Morrison carried her into the desert, where it was hot and where she should have died. The red wasteland seemed to go on forever in front of them. The two suns rose higher. The temperature went up. Jake just kept walking, carrying his enemy toward an unknown future. Queen Lyra had stopped telling Jake to leave her behind by the second day. She had completely given up on that fight. She had met a lot of stubborn people in her long life, but the human was the most stubborn of them all. He just wouldn't listen to reason. He just kept walking, no matter what she said or how hard she tried to convince him that he was wasting his life. And during those 2 days she had seen him do things that were impossible. She had seen him walk right through a sandstorm that came out of nowhere. It was the kind that could blind you in seconds and strip paint off of metal. He had wrapped them both in a thin metallic blanket, put part of his shirt over her face, and pushed through the howling wind and stinging sand. She could feel him fighting against it and she could feel how hard every step was, but he never stopped. Never even stopped. She had seen him climb rocky passes that should have been too hard for someone carrying her weight. His hands bled because he was holding onto the sharp stones. She thought his legs would give out at any moment because they were shaking so badly. But somehow he found places to stand where there didn't seem to be any. He somehow got them both up hills that looked completely vertical. He did all of this while making sure she didn't fall and keeping her injured body safe from more harm. The patrols were the worst. They had to hide from groups of Kithrii soldiers looking for them twice now. Jake took this camouflage netting out of his pack. It seemed to make them almost invisible to scanners. He had thrown it over both of them, and they had lain there in the dirt, not moving and barely breathing, while her own people walked by so close that they could have touched them. He had kept his hand steady on his weapon the whole time, ready to fight if they were found. She thought it was just nerve. The person had nerves of steel. The water though really got to her. They didn't have much of it. By the second day his canteen was probably only a quarter full, and the heat of the desert was terrible. The two suns dried everything out. She had told him and really ordered him not to waste it on her. She could go longer without water than people could. He shouldn't have shared. He had shared anyway. He would stop every few hours and make her drink. He insisted on just a sip or two. She could also see that his lips were dry and his skin looked tight and dry. He was in worse shape than she was, but he kept giving her the water they both needed so badly. The bandages were a different story. He had ripped up his own extra clothes to cover her wounds. He used some kind of medical gel from his kit to help her burns. He used pieces of metal from his tools to splint her broken arms. He worked slowly and carefully, checking on her injuries every time they stopped to rest. His hands were rougher than Kithrii hands and he only had 2 instead of 4, but they were steady and sure. Lyra finally asked the question that had been bothering her since he first picked her up from the wrecked ship. They were taking a break and were hiding behind a big rock formation. Why? She wanted her voice to be stronger, but 2 days without proper medical care had worn it down. Your people and mine have been fighting for 3 years now. 3 long bloody years. I have killed people, Jake. I gave the orders for attacks that killed thousands of your people. I made choices that led to the deaths of human soldiers. Why are you doing this then? Why are you putting everything on the line for me? Jake didn't stop what he was doing to look up. He was looking at her bandages again to make sure that the wounds on her side hadn't started to bleed. She noticed that his jaw was set in a way that showed he was really thinking about something. Yeah, well, he said after a long pause. I've also killed Kithrii. To be honest, probably more than I can count. I shot them, blew them up, and did what I had to do to stay alive and finish my missions. That doesn't mean I'll let someone die in the middle of the desert though. There's a difference between war and peace. Murder is a different thing. He stopped for a moment, and his hands stopped moving as he adjusted the bandage. My sister Emily was a nurse. The best one in her group. She always said that if you can help someone, you should. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, or what side they're on. You are responsible if you can save a life and don't. You get to choose that. She thought that all the way to the end. Even though Lyra was weak, her hearing was still sharp. She noticed how his voice changed when he said, was instead of is. In the past. She knew what that meant. Was? She asked in a low voice. Jake's jaw got tight. A muscle in his cheek moved. Enemy artillery fire. 6 months ago. Her field hospital was hit directly. At least they said it was quick. She didn't feel bad. He finally looked at Lyra and she could see something real in his eyes. Pain that was still there. Even though I'm still doing what she taught me, still trying to follow what she thought was right. That might be dumb. Could get me killed. But it's all I have left of her. Something strange twisted in Lyra's chest. In the Kithrii Empire, where she lived, weakness was not accepted. If you couldn't keep up, you were out of luck. People thought you were weak or even a traitor if you showed mercy to an enemy. Everything was about strength. Everything was about power. People thought that being kind was a bad trait, and they wanted to teach young warriors not to be kind as soon as possible. But there was this person. This soldier had been fighting her people for years. He had lost his sister to Kithrii weapons, and he probably lost friends and fellow soldiers as well. He had every reason to hate her, to let her die, or even to kill her himself. Instead, he had to carry her for 2 days straight through conditions that were impossible. He was so tired that his legs shook every time he stood up, but he wouldn't stop. Refused to give in. Would not settle for anything less than honorable. In her culture it didn't make sense. But in his culture it made perfect sense. In my culture, Lyra said slowly and carefully, there is an old tradition. A long time ago. The Corvesh bond is what it's called. When someone carries a member of the royal family to safety against all odds, or when they risk everything to protect royalty without thinking about their own safety, they earn the highest honor our empire can give. They become close to that royal. Connected to them in a way that everyone in Kithrii space knows about. Jake just nodded as if she had told him something about the weather. He finished checking her bandages and started to pack up their things so they could move again. That's interesting, he said. But first let's make sure you get home. Taking you back to your people so you can get real medical care. All that stuff about honor and traditions can wait. All we need to do right now is stay alive. He bent down and put her back on his shoulders. She could tell how hard it was for him now. He could feel his muscles shaking from the strain. He had been carrying her for almost 48 hours with only short breaks. No one should be able to do what he was doing. It should be impossible in real life. But he did it anyway. Lyra looked ahead as Jake started to move again, keeping up the slow, steady pace he'd kept for 2 days. The heat made the horizon look like it was shimmering, but she could just barely see something different through the waves. Maybe structures. Structures. She realized it was the human forward base. They were very close. This trip would be over in a few more hours, maybe less. And that's when Lyra realized something that should have scared her, something that went against everything she had been taught and everything she believed about people, enemies, and how the universe worked. She didn't want this trip to be over. She didn't want to say goodbye to this strange, stubborn, honorable person who had been kinder to her in 2 days than her own people had been in years. This person who kept his sister's lessons close to his heart and wouldn't let war change him into a cruel person. Queen Lyra of the Kithrii Empire finally understood what mercy meant after living for a long time. And it made everything different. A few seconds before, the medical bay had been quiet and calm. The usual sounds of a hospital filled the air, and doctors moved from one patient to the next. Then Lyra opened her mouth and everything went completely wrong. I invoke Corvesh, she said from her recovery bed, her voice strong and clear even though she was hurt. Jake learned that crossing all 4 of her arms over her chest was a traditional formal gesture among her people. This man, Jake Morrison, carried me 30 miles through enemy territory when he could have just left me there to die. He put everything on the line for someone he had every reason to hate. I claim him as my bonded mate according to the old laws of my people and traditions that go back thousands of years. For about 3 seconds the room was completely quiet. Then it seemed like everyone started to yell at the same time. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, Jake's boss, turned a shade of red that Jake had never seen on a person's face before. She looked like she had just eaten broken glass and was doing everything she could to keep from screaming. Absolutely not, she said, her voice tight and controlled in a way that showed she was really angry. Sergeant Morrison is a soldier for the United Earth. He works for me. You can't just say he's a political tool or a diplomatic bargaining chip. Lyra's face went cold and her yellow eyes narrowed in a threatening way. Her voice could have frozen fire when she spoke. It is not bargaining, Colonel. This is the law. My people have followed this law for longer than your species has had written language. It would be a serious insult to the Kithrii Empire and to me as a member of the royal family to publicly refuse the Corvesh bond. Last time someone insulted our throne like that, it started a war that lasted 50 years and killed millions of people on both sides. Jake sat in the corner of the room with his head in his hands, trying to figure out what was going on. 3 days ago, his biggest worry was finishing a regular patrol. People were now saying he was some kind of alien mate and they were talking about wars, insults, and old laws. None of this made sense. Can someone please explain this to me in simple terms? He asked, covering his mouth with his hands. Because I carried her to keep her alive. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I didn't carry her to get married or get close to her or whatever this is. I just didn't want anyone to die when I could stop it. When she looked at him, Lyra's face changed. The coldness went away and was replaced by something softer, almost loving. The Corvesh bond is not the same as getting married, Jake. At first, it's not about love or romance. It's a sign of respect. You know that you have the qualities that a queen needs in someone who stands next to her. Power. Respect. Willpower. The ability to do the right thing even when it's hard and could cost you everything. She moved around in bed, wincing a little as her injuries reminded her that they were still healing. In my culture, queens have complete control over most things. But we are also completely responsible. We decide who stands with us. Who gives us advice. Who do we trust with our lives and the lives of our people? I choose you. You don't even know me. Jake looked up at her and said no. We were together for 2 days and most of that time I was just walking around while you were unconscious or in pain. You don't have enough time to get to know someone. That's not even enough time to learn someone's name. Lyra leaned forward as much as her injuries would let her. Her yellow eyes were locked on his, strong and steady. I knew you when you gave me your last drop of water in the desert, even though you were more thirsty than I was. I knew you when you walked until your feet bled and you could barely stand but wouldn't stop. I knew you when you used hands that were trained to kill my kind to treat my wounds. Those hands could have killed me but they chose to save me instead. I knew you when you kept us safe from patrols. One wrong move could have killed us both, but you stayed calm and kept me safe. She stopped. I know enough, Jake Morrison. I know who you really are. That's more than most people learn about each other in years. The door to the medical bay burst open and a lot of people came in. Security guards, police officers and medical staff are all trying to keep things in order. Then someone important came and everyone else had to stand up straight and pay attention. Ambassador Thomas Fletcher was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many deals go wrong. He got there 2 hours after Lyra's announcement, which is pretty fast for a diplomat. He looked very serious and his face was pale. 3 huge Kithrii warships had appeared in orbit behind him, visible through the windows of the space station where the medical bay was. They didn't need to charge their weapons though. Just being there sent a clear message. There was more than just 2 people involved now. This had turned into something much bigger and more dangerous. The ambassador took Colonel Hayes aside for a quick, quiet talk. Jake looked at their faces and saw how the colonel's anger slowly changed into worry and resignation. After a few minutes they both looked at him. Sergeant Morrison, the ambassador said in a formal but not unkind voice. I need you to know what's going on with us. Queen Lyra's Corvesh bond isn't just a cultural tradition. The Kithar have a sacred law that says it would be a huge insult to turn it down, especially in public. Jake's stomach dropped. And what happens if someone insults them like that? War, the ambassador said simply. Maybe not right away, but it would give the hardliners on their side all the reasons they need to keep fighting. For months, we've been trying to make peace. This could ruin all of that progress. Jake said slowly, so if I say no, people die. Are you saying that? In that moment, Ambassador Fletcher looked like he had aged 10 years. Yes, possibly thousands. Maybe even more. The Kithrii have ships and weapons technology that we can't match. We could lose a lot of people if this war goes on and gets worse. This hasn't happened since the first days of the war. Jake scanned the room. At Colonel Hayes, who looked angry but lost. To the ambassador, who looked tired and hopeless. At the many officers and officials who had gathered around him, all of them watching him like he was a bomb that could go off at any moment. Finally, Lyra looked at him with her strange yellow eyes, and her face was hard to read. "And if I accept?" he asked quietly. "What happens next?" Lyra leaned forward again, and this time her face looked almost hopeful. "Then we both have time," she said. "Time to get to know each other. It's time to learn about our cultures, our people, and how we see the world. It's time to find out if what started as a duty, an obligation, or a political necessity could turn into something more. Something real." "You're asking me to trust you," Jake said. "I'm asking you to trust the person you saw in me when you chose to carry me through that desert," Lyra said. "The same way I trust the person I saw in you. The person who gave away water that he didn't need. The person who walked until he couldn't walk anymore and then kept walking anyway. The person who saw an enemy and decided to see a life worth saving instead." Jake shut his eyes. He thought about his sister Emily and what she would tell him to do. He thought about the soldiers he was in charge of, the friends he had made, and the people on Earth who were counting on him to come home. He thought about the thousands of people who could die if this went wrong, if the war went on, or if peace fell apart. He thought about spending 2 days in the desert with someone who should have been his enemy and realizing that the line between friend and enemy wasn't as clear as he had always thought. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Lyra. "Okay," he said. "I'll do it. I'll take this bond or whatever it is. But we do it the right way. We take the time you said. We really get to know each other, not just because an old law says we have to. If it doesn't work though and we can't find a way to agree, we'll figure out how to end this without starting another war. Deal?" Lyra smiled for the first time since they met. Smiled a lot. It changed her whole face, making her look less like a scary alien queen and more like someone who had just gotten an unexpected gift. "Deal?" she said. The talks were so bad that Jake thought they were worse than anything he had done in real life. At least in a fight, you knew who your enemies were and what they wanted. In these never-ending diplomatic meetings, everyone smiled while they tried to tear you apart with words instead of weapons. Jake had to sit through 16-hour sessions that felt more like interrogations than conversations. There were politicians, military leaders, and experts on both sides. They all looked at him and Lyra like they were prize cattle that were being looked at before they were bought. They asked him personal questions about his family, his military service, and his political views. They wanted to know everything about him, even the smallest things, but it didn't seem like they cared about him as a person. To them he was just a game piece. The hardliners from Earth were the worst of all. People called him a traitor to his face and said he was selling out all of humanity to an alien. They asked him about his loyalty, his judgment, and his sanity. One general even said that he had been brainwashed or drugged, since no loyal soldier would willingly tie themselves to an enemy queen. Another politician said that he was weak and that he had fallen for enemy tricks. He said that real soldiers would have let her die in that desert like she deserved. Jake sat through it all with his jaw clenched, telling himself that getting angry would only make things worse. But her own people were just as bad to Lyra. The Kithrii nobles looked at her with disgust that was hard to hide. They wondered if her injuries had hurt her mind and if the crash and the trip through the desert had left her unable to make good choices. Some people thought she was dishonoring her family by choosing a human, which they thought was a lower species, as her bonded mate. Others said she had become weak, that she was no longer fit to lead, and that someone stronger should take her place on the throne. Lyra took their insults with the same cold dignity she had shown in the desert, but Jake could tell they hurt her. Could see how her hands would clench into fists when they questioned her judgment and how her jaw would set when they called her weak. Even though there was a lot of tension and awkwardness between them, protocol said they had to live together. By military standards, their shared diplomatic suite was very nice. It had separate bedrooms but a shared living space. At first, it felt strange to live with someone who was technically his bonded mate but was still mostly a stranger. In the mornings they would dance around each other and have awkward conversations over meals. Then they would go back to their own rooms to work on diplomatic papers and reports. Everything changed on the 5th day of talks. Jake was looking over files on his data pad, trying to figure out the huge amounts of information that both sides had given him about how the war started. He had a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He learned to trust those feelings while he was in the military. More than once they had saved his life. He suddenly looked up from his screen and said, "Someone's giving both sides bad information." Lyra was on the other side of the room, using her recovered arms to work on her own data tablet. She had healed very quickly, which was something that the human doctors found very interesting about Kithrii biology. She looked up at what he said. "Explain," she said simply. Jake got up and brought his pad to her. "These reports about Kithrii troop movements that supposedly started the war, the ones that made Earth think you were getting ready for a huge invasion? They're made up. Check the times on the files. They were made 3 days after the battles they were supposed to predict, not before. Someone went back and made up fake intelligence reports to explain things that had already happened. Lyra's yellow eyes got bigger. She quickly opened the classified documents that she had been given access to for these negotiations. These were the records of her own empire. Her 4 hands moved quickly across the screen, opening up one file after another. These human attacks on our colonies that made us respond militarily at first, she said slowly, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. The proof is also false. There are signs in the sensor data and the communication intercepts that they were made up after the fact. They both looked away from their screens and stared at each other. The effects were huge. Someone wanted this war, Jake said slowly, his mind racing through all the things that could have happened. People on both sides worked together to make sure our people went to war with each other. And now they want us dead to keep it going, Lyra said, her face getting darker. If we show that this conspiracy is real and that corrupt officials on both sides planned the war, it would take away their power. They would lose everything they gained from the war when peace came. For the next few hours they dug deeper, gathered evidence and built a case. They were so focused on their work that they didn't hear the door to their suite being unlocked from the outside. It was just after midnight when the attempt on the life happened. The door flew open while Jake was still at his desk going over files. 4 HFY warriors in matte black armor burst in and moved with deadly accuracy. No marks or insignias to show who they are. Killers for hire. Before Jake's conscious mind even realized there was a threat, his training kicked in. He dove behind the couch and pulled out his service pistol, which he had kept hidden even though guns were not allowed in the diplomatic area. 2 shots to the center mass brought down the first warrior. Their armor was good but not good enough up close. Even though she was still healing from her injuries, Lyra moved faster. She grabbed one of the heavy chairs with her lower arms and threw it with a lot of force, hitting the second warrior in the chest and sending them crashing into the wall. She took a decorative metal sculpture off a shelf with her upper arms and hit the third warrior's helmet with it hard enough to break the faceplate. Jake rolled over, got up and shot the second warrior as they were trying to get up. The room was a mess, with furniture turned over, alarms going off, and the smell of gunpowder and alien blood in the air. While Lyra was busy with the third warrior, the fourth warrior came after her. Jake saw it happen and saw the blade coming up behind her. He didn't think about it, he just moved. Attacked the warrior from the side and knocked them both to the ground. They fought with their hands, which was brutal and effective. The warrior was strong, well-trained, and deadly. Jake had been fighting for his life since he was 18, and when he had to, he learned how to fight dirty. He won but only just. When it was over, 3 of the attackers were dead and the 4th was unconscious and tied up with makeshift restraints. Jake and Lyra stood back to back in the middle of the ruined room, both breathing hard and covered in purple alien blood. "You fought through the pain for me," Jake said, looking over his shoulder at her. He could tell she was hurt and that the fight had reopened some of her wounds, but she fought anyway. "You fought 4 HFY warriors for me," Lyra said, and there was something in her voice he hadn't heard before. Maybe respect. Or something more. "I think we're even." A few moments later, security forces showed up, followed by medics. They arrested the last assassin, and that's when things really got out of hand. The captured warrior talked when he was being questioned and there was no way out. For the first time, they told everything to Earth intelligence officers and HFY investigators who were working together. A plot that went deeper than anyone had thought. Generals on Earth who were getting rich from military contracts. HFY warlords who had been using the war to gain more power and get rid of their political enemies. They had planned the war together, given both sides false information, and made sure it kept going because peace would destroy their carefully built empires of corruption and blood money. Jake stood in the observation room and watched the interrogation through glass that only let light through. Lyra was next to him, and her wounds were still bandaged. They had been trying to kill them both to keep this secret safe, to make sure there was never peace, and to protect their power and wealth at the cost of many lives. He looked at Lyra for the first time as a person who had fought with him, not as a duty or a political problem. Someone who had his back when killers came in the night. Someone who cared about justice and truth as much as he did. "Do you want to get rid of some corrupt officials?" he asked, and even though they had just been through a lot, he almost smiled. Lyra's face changed. Her smile, with its sharp teeth, was fierce, pretty, and a little scary. "Jake Morrison, I thought you would never ask. They had things to do. There is evidence to collect, a war to end, and conspirators to catch. And for the first time since this whole crazy thing started, they were going to do it together. Not because old laws told them to, but because they wanted to. Claude is an AI, so he can make mistakes. Please check the answers again." What happened next was a joint operation that had never happened before in the history of the war. Soldiers from the human special forces working with the HFY Royal Guard. Two species that had been fighting and killing each other for 3 years suddenly started working together, sharing information and trusting each other with their lives. It shouldn't have worked. It should have fallen apart right away according to all logic and reason. But it didn't happen. Jake and Lyra were in charge, and that made all the difference. The soldiers and warriors they were in charge of saw a human and a HFY working together perfectly, with each one making up for the other's weaknesses and strengths. Jake brought his tactical skills, his knowledge of unconventional warfare, and his ability to plan 3 steps ahead of the enemy. Lyra brought with her a lot of knowledge about empire politics, connections to loyal forces in the HFY military, and an understanding of how power worked behind the scenes. They couldn't be stopped when they were together. They had broken up the whole conspiracy in less than 2 weeks. They arrested corrupt generals on Earth who had been sending weapons to keep the war going. They revealed HFY warlords who had been using the war to get rid of political enemies and take over land. They gave both governments so much proof, including documents, recordings, and testimonies, that they had no choice but to act. The people who were involved in the conspiracy were arrested, their money was frozen, and their power was taken away. And when the conspiracy was revealed and it was clear that corrupt officials had started the war instead of real problems, both governments had to start real peace talks. Not the half-hearted attempts they'd made before, but real talks about ending the war for good. Jake stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station and watched Earth rise over the moon's edge. That view was lovely. From up here, the blue and white marble of his home world looks so fragile, but it is so valuable. He had fought for 3 years to keep that world safe, and in the process he lost friends and his sister. And now at last there may be real peace. Lyra stood next to him, so close that their shoulders almost touched. Now all 4 of her arms were healed and working again. The scars from the crash and the trip through the desert were just scars now, reminders of how they had met but no longer painful. Jake said quietly, still looking out at Earth, "The bond. You know you don't have to do it now, right? The fighting is over. The political crisis that made it necessary has passed. You could let me go. No one would blame you. We could just go our separate ways and go back to our own lives." "I know," Lyra said in a soft voice. She was looking at the stars instead of Earth, at the far-off lights that stood for her empire. "Do you want to be free of it?" Jake thought about the last month. Thought about it a lot, not just the big dramatic parts but also the small, quiet ones. The late-night strategy meetings where they worked together until dawn, fueled by bad coffee and a strong desire to win. Lyra laughed at his jokes, even the really bad ones that made everyone else groan. That laugh that surprised her, like she wasn't used to finding things funny but couldn't help it. He thought about the times they had talked when they weren't planning operations or going over evidence. How she had told him about her childhood, growing up in the HFY royal family where showing weakness meant death and she had to be perfect all the time. The crown she had worn since she was a young adult was heavy, and she was responsible for billions of lives. He had also told his own stories. He talked about Emily and how much he missed her, his family on Earth who worried about him every day he was deployed, and his hopes and dreams for what he would do when the war was over. You could start a small business in a quiet place. Maybe you could teach. Maybe you should just live a normal life for once. They had really gotten to know each other in ways that had nothing to do with old laws or politics. "My sister Emily," Jake said, finally turning to face Lyra, "used to say something that stuck with me. She said that the worst situations lead to the best things in life, the things that are really worth having. Finding the good in the bad. Finding hope in the dark. Finding a way to connect in the middle of chaos." He stopped for a moment to think about what to say. "I carried you 30 miles through that desert because it was the right thing to do. Because I would have been haunted by leaving you there for the rest of my life. But I'm here talking to you because I want to be. Not because of duty, obligation, or fear of starting another war. I came here because you stopped being someone I had to be with and became someone I really care about." Lyra's face changed. The formal mask she usually wore, the cold dignity of a queen, fell off. Jake had learned that her face only softened like that when she felt really safe. "Then maybe," she said slowly, reaching out with one hand to take his, "we can make this journey together?" She felt like she could be herself instead of the image everyone else had of her. Not as political necessities or diplomatic solutions, but as real partners? Two people who want to stand together not because they have to? Jake took her hand and it felt right in a way that had nothing to do with old customs. He said, "I'd like that." A week later, there was a bonding ceremony that neither of their peoples had ever seen before. They had worked with cultural experts from both sides to make something that honored the traditions of both humans and HFY by combining them into something new. Something that stood for not only their bond but also the hope that their people could live together in peace in the future. Mary, Jake's mother, flew up from Earth for the wedding. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, and she cried happy tears the whole time. She had been scared when Jake first told her about Lyra, the bond, and everything that had happened. But she had met Lyra the day before the ceremony, and whatever they had talked about in private had made her change her mind completely. Now she hugged Lyra with real warmth and welcomed her into the family as if she had always been there. Lyra's advisors were there too. They were the ones who had stayed loyal through the conspiracy and its aftermath. At first, they were shocked to see their queen bond with a human in a ceremony that combined traditions in ways that had never been done before. But as the ceremony went on and they saw how Lyra and Jake looked at each other and moved together like they had been partners for years instead of weeks, even the most traditional advisors seemed to be impressed, even though they didn't want to be. People all over the galaxy watched through live feeds and broadcasts. Billions of people, HFY, and other species are all watching this historic event. A human soldier and an alien queen holding hands, all four of hers with both of his, promising to stand together and make something new out of the ashes of war. Lyra leaned in close to Jake and whispered so only he could hear during the reception afterward, which was full of guests from 100 worlds. When I first saw you in that crashed ship, I thought people were completely crazy. Who would carry an enemy queen through a desert for 30 miles? It didn't make sense. Jake smiled, the easy smile that she had come to love. When I first met you, I thought HFY queens were too proud to ask for help even when they really needed it. You really told me to leave you there to die. Lyra laughed, a surprised, happy laugh that still caught her off guard sometimes. We were both right, she said. Still, here we are. Here we are, Jake said, squeezing her hands gently. I have to say, I'm done carrying you places though. My back still hurts from crossing the desert. We will walk together from now on. Partners on equal footing. Lyra's smile lit up her whole face. Okay. If you keep introducing me to these Earth foods, I might still need help. That pizza you made me eat last week? That was against the law of war. I'm pretty sure it broke a number of treaties between stars. Jake laughed. You ate 3 pieces. I was being polite. You asked for the recipe. They joked with each other and were comfortable with each other in a way that felt natural now. The party went on all around them. For the first time in years, humans and HFY were able to mix freely, sharing food and stories and starting the slow, careful process of becoming friends instead of enemies. Jake and Lyra stood together at the window again, looking out at the stars while the party went on behind them. On one side you could see Earth and on the other, you could see the distant glow of HFY space. 2 worlds, 2 groups of people, now linked by an impossible bond that started when one stubborn person refused to leave someone behind. What do you think comes next? Lyra asked in a low voice. Jake thought about it for a while. About the talks about peace that would go on for months, maybe even years. About how hard it is to rebuild trust between 2 species that have been killing each other. They talked about the future they would have to build together, not just as a couple but also as bridges between their 2 groups. He said, I don't know. But no matter what it is, we'll face it together. No more carrying. No one person should have to carry all the weight. We do this together as partners. Lyra put her head on his shoulder, a sign of trust and love that would have shocked anyone who knew the proud HFY queen before. Together, she said softly. And while they stood there looking at the stars, 2 people who had once been enemies but had become something much more important felt the same thing. Hope. They both had real hope for a future that they couldn't have imagined just a few weeks ago. They had come this far on a journey that had started with a shipwreck in the desert and continued through 30 miles of impossible odds. They both knew that this was only the beginning,